The war in Kashmir in 1947 was quickly spreading in all the three fronts, with the Indian armed forces trying to push back the invaders on all of them. The Srinagar highway, along the Naushera-Poonch communication line, and up north along the Gilgit-Skardu route. This video walks you through the details of the war from the perspective of the town of Leh. Colonel Thapa, who was posted in Leh in October of 1947 at the beginning of the war, left north with his troops for the town of Skardu in an attempt to try and strengthen the defenses of the town. For the details of India's campaign in the north of Kashmir, please watch the previous videos in the series. After Colonel Thapa left with his troops, Leh was left with just 33 men for its defense. Leh was a town deep inside the Indian territory and had the towns of Skardu and Kargil as buffer regions before it could even be threatened. In order to increase the town's strength, on March 8, 1948, Srinagar ordered two Dogra to go on foot to strengthen the defense of Leh. Their objective was to raise and train local militia at Leh to make the defense more reliant on the local population rather than the regular Indian armed forces. With this, more regular troops could be made available for the campaigns in other regions. By April of 1948, 50 locals had been trained to support defense activities of Leh. They were on track to raise enough local militia in the coming weeks and months to make the defense of Leh self-sustainable. Everything was going as planned in the efforts of defending Leh when an event happened up north that dramatically changed the equation for the town. May 10, 1948, the enemy's surprise attack outflanking the towns of Sonmarg, Dras and Kargil came into effect. Even though the towns of Sonmarg was able to push back the attacks, Dras and more importantly Kargil fell to the invaders. So in one quick succession, Leh, that initially had the protection of three buffer towns and a secure supply line for reinforcements, was suddenly vulnerable from enemy attacks and completely isolated from the Indian strongholds in Kashmir. Despite the commendable efforts by the troops at Leh to set up its defense, the troop strength present at Leh and the resources available with them were not enough to sustain the defense of the town for very long. The town needed to be reinforced with troops and supplies urgently, otherwise Leh was all but lost. Leh could be reinforced by the Indian side through three ways. First, through the Srinagar-Kargil-Leh highway. This highway was the easiest and the fastest way to continuously reinforce Leh. The Indian side was banking on this option, but with the loss of Dras and Kargil, this line of communication was broken. The Indian side would have had to take these areas from the enemy first in order to supply Leh. Second was air support. Without the highway, the alternate way was to reinforce the town by air. Leh did not have any airstrips yet. The troops had to first prepare an airstrip for the Royal Indian Air Force Dakotas to land in order to supply Leh with troops and resources. To make matters even more difficult, the weather in the area was bad too often, making this option of reinforcement unreliable at best. The third and the final way was an untested route through the cold mountain from behind Leh via Manali. There was no route that existed through this way so far. If this way was to be used, the Indian side would have had to create a route from this direction that would eventually be used by the Indian troops as an option for reinforcement. This was through a very challenging and mountainous terrain. While all these options were explored, the defense of Leh was left up to the small number of troops present there. Their objective was to hold off the enemy assaults until one of the three options pan out. and more troops arrived to strengthen the defense of the town. Leh was isolated and extremely vulnerable, that could fall at any time. May 17th, 1948. Colonel S.B. Singh and Major Kaut's sugar column that had dispersed just before Skardu made it to Leh. This somewhat helped build the troop strength, although this relief was only temporary, because a few days later, a big disaster happened in the defense of Leh. On May 22nd, the enemy attacked a crucial bridge in the outskirts of Leh. At this bridge, the Indian troops had put strong defenses to stop enemy advance. During the assault, the Indian troops guarding the bridge suffered heavy casualties and were forced to retreat. They destroyed the bridge before withdrawing from their positions to slow the enemy's advance further. The enemy now was just 1 or 2 attacks away from storming into the town. The troops at Leh, with the help of the local civilian population, were working on building a temporary airstrip to enable air support to start coming in. It was successfully completed with the means available. It was still too risky for the Dakotas to land on this trip. This, along with bad weather, made the aerial route not a reliable option for reinforcing Leh in the long term. The Indian side started planning Dakota sorties to Leh. They also started planning operations from Sonmarg to take back Dras and eventually Kargil. And as a far-fetched Plan C, the Central Command ordered scouts on an exploratory mission to find a path from Manali through the rough terrain into Leh. So the basic plan was to reinforce Leh by air until the Srinagar-Leh highway could be opened up again. All this along with the Manali-Leh option as a shot in the dark. Meanwhile, on May 22, 1948, the troops at Leh, after taking into account their numbers and resources, concluded that they could only sustain the defense of Leh for just 2 more days. That is, until May 24th, 1948. They requested immediate air support and reinforcements to be provided to them latest by May 24th. There was no other option for the Indian side but to risk sending their Dakotas and the troops in it to reinforce Leh. May 24th was extremely bad weather, and no Indian pilot had ever attempted a trip like this. To fly in such high altitude and bad conditions and then land on a makeshift airstrip that had just recently been completed. Royal Indian Air Force most senior flying officer, Air Commodore Meher Singh, took up the task to fly the Dakota in these challenging conditions. He was able to fly through the conditions and successfully land in Leh. This provided the much needed relief in the troop strength and resources to the defenses there. Another set of reinforcements were promised for May 26th, but the weather took a turn for the worse and no further reinforcements could be provided for the next 5 days. With no reinforcements available in Leh after the first trip, the troops started to get dispirited, which increased the chances of desertion in the ranks. The officers decided to pull back all their troops from the outskirts of Leh into the main town to strengthen the defense of the town as one strong unit. Meanwhile, the base at Srinagar started planning out troop deployments to strengthen defenses in Sonmarg, which was to be used as a base to launch attacks into Dras. As for the Manali-Leh link, the first column of Indian troops was dispatched from Manali towards Leh. The column had 6 officers and 151 soldiers along with some local guides. This was under the command of Major Hari Chand. As mentioned before, this was a very treacherous, onerous trek and would take the column weeks to months to reach Leh, if at all they were successful. The enemy at this time was just 27 kilometers away from Leh and was about to launch their first major assault into the town. It seemed like this was the final stand for the defense force at Leh.